suggested that that the gentleman starts and not the lady, but then come to the podium as well. I think, as Professor Boulton has clearly outlined, the academic medical associations have, let's say, ignored the medical devices for a period of time. However, they have understood and acted in the last years appropriately to act differently by organizing these EASD diabetes technology meetings in Düsseldorf in the last years, and as you have seen also in the next year. And I believe this is a major step forward to acknowledge the safety issues that were seen, that are still there. At the same point in time, I think it's hopefully also open up the road for a more detailed discussion what is needed also in the communication with the manufacturers of such devices. They were able for acting for a period of time somewhat undercover by the academic people, because for many of them, and probably still some of them today, a pump, a blood glucose meter, or a CGM is a gadget which is not of real help or need in the treatment of patients with diabetes. And I believe that the ADA EASD Diabetes Committee that Anne and myself are representing here will hopefully be able to make a difference there by highlighting the clinical view on such devices, that there is a need for a more thorough understanding of what are the safety issues that we see, and Anne can elaborate on much more on, for example, the database that the FDA has, in which all medical reports are listed when it comes to pump issues, and what we, that means 6 of us in total, have written up in a first version of a manuscript that we hope to submit sooner than later to well-known European and American journals, in which we try to describe again from a clinical point of view what are the safety and efficacy issues that we see with insulin pumps. And this is hopefully only the first of a series of manuscripts in which we would like to highlight the different aspects of blood glucose meters, CGMs, and so on, in which we also then, in interaction with the medical association, will be able to have open discussions, probably during the EASD or similar platforms, about what to do next. And I would like to ask Anne now to give the ADA view on it, and probably give you also some ideas about the issues or the details of what we have tried to fix in this statement. Anne.
All right, so this is one of those committees I said yes to without actually asking what they meant that I was supposed to do. I have since learned I should not ever do that again. But what I did learn was how much I don't know. So first of all, even though I'm an academic and do research, what I do every day is see patients. And every day I see patients using devices. So I'm actually really knowledgeable from a clinical perspective, and I've done some research, but most of my work comes from day in, day out seeing patients. And there's a lot of issues with devices, and one of the things I never understood is why I don't see clinical trials with devices that tell me which one's better, which one's safer, whether the features of a pump mean something or not. So when I was asked to be part of this committee, I decided that I should look into really what was happening, what was the available data. So the available data comes from a system of safety monitoring, which is called MAUDE, M-A-U-D-E, which stands for something in the FDA, but it's basically a searchable database that tells you all of the device issues that have been reported to the FDA. And we're just looking at pumps first, then we're doing sensors, and then we're going to eventually be working with the artificial pancreas development, because really all of this is about trying to make sure that it's a safe world as technology advances. So when you look at the MAUDE database, what you realize is that the vast majority of pump-related adverse events seem to me to be user errors. That is, patients who go out there, put on an insulin pump, don't know how to troubleshoot, go into ketoacidosis, and they report it as a pump error. What I also realized is that there's one company who is not the largest pump manufacturer, it is Animas, who has 80% of the reports, the adverse event reports in this system, and the other pump companies, including Medtronic, have only a very small piece of the pie, which then leads you to think that there's an ascertainment bias, that the people reporting are doing it differently. So what I decided to do next, when I realized that I didn't understand even the reporting, and nor, by the way, can you use keywords to understand the reporting. In most cases, or many cases, the pump companies ask for the pump to come back so they can evaluate the pump to see if it's broken or not, and then they give that information to the FDA. But I, as a clinician, can't know the data. I can't know how reliable pumps are. I can't know how often a pump actually misfunctions itself. I get called every weekend with people having pump problems because I'm the one on call for my patients. I need to understand more about the device. What is the safety of the device? I also realized, and in talking to a lot of colleagues, that a big area of concern is the infusion sets, right? Because the infusion sets clog. And if the infusion set's a problem, well, who's regulating the infusion sets? Does anybody know? As far as I can tell, nobody knows who's really regulating the infusion sets. So what I decided to do was I sent out a series of questions both to pump companies, each and every one of them, as well as to the FDA. And I asked everybody to talk to me. And I said, I want from the committee to ask you a series of questions. So all of the pump companies responded and said they'd get back to me. 3 of them, and this will be discussed more in my presentation on Thursday, did talk to me. And in talking to the pump companies, I realized a number of things. One is I can't get data. The data that I want. How many pumps are sold? How many pumps are returned? How long do pumps last? How reliable are they? That kind of data I can't get as a clinician. I can only get the reassurance that the pumps are reliable. So I can't get actual data that I really would like to assess the information. And so I asked the pump companies who regulates the infusion sets. And they said, oh, they're regulated and followed by the infusion set makers. But you actually can't search for infusion set problems in the FDA database. In fact, what you get are all the infusion sets that give IV chemotherapy, which is wholly different than subcutaneous infusion sets. So then I had a wonderful conference call. You weren't able to be on it because you weren't on an airplane, with the FDA. And 5 of the key people in the device division of the FDA were willing to really talk to me and really give me the FDA's perspective. And I learned a great deal. And again, I'm going to present a lot of what I learned at the next meeting. I realized that so much of the pump safety, the device safety, is in the hands of the pump manufacturers. Because the FDA can't actually deal with all the information that comes in just like I can't, that they really rely on the pump companies to tell them if there's a problem or not. So most of the recalls, and there's only really been about 12 recalls in the past 10 years, come from the actual pump companies, not the FDA asking for the recalls. The FDA is supposed to go and inspect the pump company plants where the pumps are made every 2 years, but it turns out to be less often than that just because they don't have enough staff and time to do it. And so even how the pump companies report the device adverse events is determined by the pump company, which is why Animas somehow seems to report everything that happens, and the other companies are more selective. So there's not even a unifying way that the pump companies themselves report to the FDA, who then has to analyze the data and tell me, the clinician, what's safe. I also asked the pump company who regulates infusion sets, and they said, oh, it's bundled with the pumps. And I said, that's interesting, because the pump companies say that it's the insulin infusion set manufacturers. So I haven't yet figured out who regulates the insulin infusion sets, but that's a very important thing to ask when we're developing the artificial pancreas and other things. Then what happened was the FDA said, we'd really like you to help us. And I said, okay. And so I've now been appointed a consultant to the FDA to review their proposals that are coming in from the device companies to help them better understand, again, from a clinician's perspective, about how these devices should be developed and how we should monitor safety. So I think it's actually one of those things where you can ask questions, but the real answer, I think, comes from understanding the process. So in terms of trying to help the European system understand device regulation, I realize that there are real limitations in the United States, although we have more guidelines than you have in Europe. And I think that as a group, we diabetologists need to start looking at how we should define safety. And I want to tell the FDA, I want to tell the manufacturing companies, as a clinician, what do we need to understand devices? What do we need to feel that devices are safe? And what do we need to do before we trust that people can go on an artificial pancreas and be okay? So I think all of this is the preamble for really this wonderful burgeoning growth of technology, but that really needs to have more information as to safety and efficacy so we can tell our patients what the best approach is. So that's basically what I've learned from being on this interesting committee. And if you want to say a few more words, that'd be good.
Yeah, just some topics that came to my mind while you presented your thoughts. You might say, okay, pump is a pump. If you look closer, life is a little bit more tricky. It might be that the name of the pump remains constant over time. However, the software, the parts in the pump and so on change over time. So then suddenly you have a recall or you have to complain by a patient about it, and then you have to say, okay, and then the question comes, which generation of the pump we are talking about? So this can become tricky, and more transparency also at this end would be of help. There is a database in which the manufacturers should bring that information in, but this is not an open database. One of the other aspects is you might say, come on, go to PubMed and look up all the publications about insulin infusion sets. However, there is a very limited number of such publications. In other words, also the scientific academic world has ignored these medical devices for a period of time, as I tried to indicate. So I think there is a need from a medical association scientific point of view to speed up into this direction, and I think the committee might be of help in making this area probably more attractive in the future. I think we can continue now for hours, but this is not the aim I've learned.